Hey guys, and welcome to another Artifact CCG.com video, and today we will be continuing our color review series, I guess you could call it, in response to Swim's own videos that he's been putting out. For those of you who don't know, Swim is a competitive Gwent player, and he's been making some rating videos going through the revealed cards. For those of you who are following the Artifact Twitter, I believe it's Play Artifact Twitter, you'll know that they're releasing cards constantly, so we might not cover all of them today because I'll just be covering what Swim covered in his video, and whenever he does a catch-up video, we will do the same. This way we can start conversations, getting different opinions going on different cards, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. One change today is hopefully I will be doing less direct comparisons to every single one of Swim's ratings, and only focusing on the big differences between us so that this can stand alone a little bit better. In any case, let's go ahead and get started. So we will be starting with the heroes, and the heroes in red are kind of very cookie cutter, or like there's a clear line between what's amazing and what is just not amazing. So as far as ratings go here, I have almost no differences from what Swim has to say. So we're going to go ahead and just start with Axe. So he's 7 to 11, so 7 attack, 2 armor, and 11 health. He has no passive. You can kind of treat the armor like a passive, and his hero card is Berserker's Call. So if we take a look at that here, you choose an allied red hero, it battles its enemy neighbors. As far as the rating goes for this guy, he is definitely 5 stars. So everything about him is just solid. He has decent attack. Like, it's really good. 7 is going to kill a lot of heroes. It will definitely kill any hero in 2 turns. If you look at his armor, that's going to be amazing. It's the 2 value that you want out of armor, so it'll block all damage from melee creeps. It'll stop the damage from conflagration completely, and it's just a solid value. And 11 health to boot is really good. And then when you look at his hero card, it's a little bit tricky because you need a red hero lined up in the right position, but its upside is incredible. You can kill even 3 heroes with this potentially. Late game, sometimes you'll run into the situation where there's just one lane that's super important. Maybe there aren't a lot of creeps in that lane. Your opponent has to chuck in his respawning heroes, because if he doesn't, he's going to lose that tower. And you're just like Berserker's Call, kill all 3 of the heroes that are blocking, kill 2 of them even, and it's probably a 1 game. And even if it's not doing that, even killing 1 hero and getting rid of all the creeps that are blocking your tower damage is good enough. So it has a crazy upside and really solid, normal normal occurrence. But in any case, if there's one thing that's holding this card back, it's the fact that it costs 6. So the only reason why you would ever consider not including Axe, if you were going to include red, is if you were running something like a blue deck and just had too many high-costed drops. So heroes like Luna and Zeus are bringing in these 6-7 cost companion cards, hero cards, what do you want to call them? And if you also toss an Axe there, you run the risk of drawing too many expensive cards right from the get-go and not being able to do anything in the early game. So that's the one thing holding him back from like pure greatness, but he's definitely deserving of 5 stars. And next, we will be taking a look at Bristleback, who is another really solid hero. However, he has his weaknesses. So I'm going to go ahead and give him a rating of 3.5. It seems really low, and I get it. I think Swim rated him more like 4/4.5. The only issue with Bristleback is that he's really only good in combination with the other red heroes, because what he gives you is a giant body, and that's great, right? But his passive isn't doing a whole lot to help anything else on the lane, like some other heroes might bring. His hero card isn't bringing a whole lot, so if we take a look at that, Vicious Nasal Goo, modify a unit with -2 armor, compare that to other hero cards, it just doesn't have a big effect on the game, right? If that's the only card you can play in a lane, it's not doing a whole lot. Sometimes it might give you a kill. It does have upsides in combination with low damage counts, so something like Zeus Ping or Conflagration, or any of these like low damage spikes are going to do more with this -2 armor card, and that's kind of neat, but it's just not the same as Legion Commander or Axe. So in that sense, he just falls behind the category in red, and he's not deserving of that like 5-star. And then I dropped him down to 3.5 because I only really see him being like an amazing hero if you can make use of his stats. And because like any like 2/4 creep can just be tossed in front of Axe, or tossed in front of Bristle, and he's not going to hit the tower. Doesn't matter that he's 8 attack, right? And red, uh, unlike, you know, it doesn't have Slay from black, or it doesn't have the wave clear of blue. So when a red hero gets stuck with a creep blocking it, it's more often that the creep's going to be there, and you're not going to hit the tower. So he needs the companion cards of Duel and Berserker's Call to be good, and that's why I feel like you can rate him lower, because his card just isn't offering what red needs, and I believe that what red needs to help it out isn't armor reduction, it's stuff that can remove creeps and remove heroes from in front of your units. Mainly creeps. If you can't deal with creeps, then your massive stats on your characters aren't going to matter anyways. But yeah, that's Bristle. I may be insane for saying 3.5. If you want to call him a 4, that's perfectly fine. I just find that he's a little bit clunky. And next we have Centaur Warrunner, who is a very high health character, 414. However, when you compare that to something like Axe with the 2 armor, the 2 armor is going to be worth more health than that extra 3 health on the Centaur Warrunner. So he's really not the beefiest red hero, and certainly not when you consider a hero like Tidehunter. But it's still really high, and he has that 4 attack with 2 retaliate, so a total of 6 damage to a unit that is across from him, which is decent. It's kind of low for red. Red kind of needs more. It needs to kill heroes with its characters. And in combination with cards like Duel and Berserker's Call, obviously that 6 damage is going to be much worse than what you'd want out of a red hero. However, you get a short sword on him, and he's kind of compensated for it. You're good enough at that 8 damage mark. But as a whole, I mean, I suppose we should take a look at his hero card first. Double Edge, so plus 8 attack, minus 8 armor for a red hero. Note that could be on both your opponent's hero and your own. So that's actually... I still remember the moment I realized I could kill my opponent's red hero for the first time with my creep. If I just went like, oh, minus 8 armor. You can hit my creep for 12 and I'll go ahead and kill your hero. It felt really good. So there is that, going for Double Edge, but it's still kind of, it's not like the premier hero card. So I'm going to give Centaur as a whole probably a 3.5. And despite me talking about how, you know, weak he is in a sense, he still deserves that 3.5 rating, and he still could see play in decks just because of how good he is against other red heroes, and because having a 1 cost 8 more damage to tower card is really good, and it's really good in red, and it's also really good with black paired in, because red and black tend to have cards that remove heroes, and the problem with the Double Edge is that if you cast it while your opponent has heroes in the lane and has mana in the lane, you're really risking like a 1 damage spell, a 2 damage spell, killing whoever you casted it on, right? But in red and in black, you know, you have cards like Gank, Duel, Berserker's Call. If you can remove your opponent's hero first, then you can cast it without any fear. And the great thing is it only costs 1. So round of 7 mana, you can Berserker's Call, kill their heroes, and then be like, okay, Double Edge, hit for 8 more to the tower, and I cleared out creeps. It's a great finisher. So I think that having that finishing capability that is so cheap that it can follow up these removal spells is good, and is worth rating him up at the 3.5 range. So despite his kind of mediocre attack, he still rates pretty highly for me. Highly being 3.5, because as I said earlier, like red is weird in that it has this giant like line right down the middle. Like these like few heroes are really good, and the other ones are kind of like, I don't know, because the problem is like red is so dependent on its heroes, because they all have better stats, that the whole like color as a whole has weaker cards, right? So a lot of the heroes that just don't have those amazing stats or that amazing hero card just aren't good enough. I don't know. I hope that they can kind of break that mold as they continue to balance the game. And I could be perceiving this wrong, but I suppose we should move on to the next red hero in the list, which is going to be Keith the Bold. He is the common hero for red, so he's the guy who's meant to be okay. The game hands it to you when you buy the game. Every player will have it. It's not amazing. but it's, a placeholder hero that's meant to be, solid. And at 6/111, he's like a discount axe, but he's got this horrendous hero card. Look at this. Plus modify a red hero with +1 attack and +1 armor for 5. That is so bad. And it's like it does nothing. The only argument that can be made for the card is, sometimes red kills a lot of heroes, so you just have this lane where there's no like a do nothing round where you don't want to play any card from your hand. You're like, oh well, I'll just toss this buff onto him. Why not? That's what his card ends up being used for, but it never gets used for anything useful. So yeah, really bad card. Discount axe stats. I'd say that he's gonna be like, oh, I don't know, a 2. You could say a 2.5, yeah, maybe even a 3, just because he has these decent stats. But the stats just aren't that much better than other red heroes. And when you consider the red cards and his card, he just has to be at least as low as a 2.5. The one saving grace for him though is that if you're not planning on spending a ton of money on artifact, right? You're not going to own every single card. He's decent. You go out there and on the marketplace or whatever they're going to have, you buy an axe and you buy a Legion commander, and you don't have another good red hero. You can toss Keith in there, and he's going to be good with duel. He's going to be good with Berserker's Call. So I'd say that he's a good common hero for red. So in that sense, if you have to run him, he's not going to be bad as long as you get a few of the good red heroes, and you want to run that 3 to 4 red color deck. But if you do have access to more than just a few of the good red heroes, then you're probably not going to be running Keith. And next on the list is Legion Commander, who is quite opposite from Keith. A full 5 out of 5 stars. Her card and her hero combination is just excellent. So at 6 attack, 1 armor, and 8 health, these aren't the best stats, but you have to consider her Retaliate 2 as her passive, so she's essentially 8/1/8 with slight weakness into armor, which is really good. 8 is going to kill a lot of heroes, and 9 health effectively with that extra armor is going to survive most attacks. But what really pushes her over the edge is duel, and duel is just insane. So being able to, you choose an allied red hero and they battle another unit, right? That is insane because, your opponent's blue hero is going to cast Annihilation. You know it, you maintain the initiative, and duel, boom, they're gone, right? I think you all get the importance of being able to pick off heroes. The one thing I feel like I need to point out is that when you first start playing the game and you first start playing red, and you get your Legion and you're all excited and you go and you play this, and you draw a duel in your first hand, and your first action of the game is like, duel, kill a hero, yes! I'm sorry, but you've just made a mistake, okay? While it may cost 2, and you can play it early, and I suppose in some games, getting that snowball going is worth it. Maybe you're killing a Luna to stop her from building up her passive, or whatever it may be. I can see a few situations where that's the right move, but a vast majority of the time, you want to save your duel for when that kill actually matters, right? As I said, the round of 6 mana is when they're initially going to try that Annihilation play, if they're blue, and that's when you want to duel. And if you use your duels early for pointless kills, you're just letting your opponent, redeploy their heroes where they want them. And sure, you got a bit of a gold advantage that might help you, but it's probably not going to be enough, especially since you won't have the key removal cards you need to get rid of your opponent's heroes in the important turns of the game. So please do not overuse duel. The only other thing I have to say about this hero is that Legion Commander's Arcana is the only Arcana I ever bought in Dota 2, because it was beautiful. She has duel as her ultimate in Dota 2, and every time you won a duel, it would keep track of how many duels you'd won on this item. It's kind of fun to see, like, oh, 200 duels won, or whatever it may be. But the fun part is, I sold that Arcana, so whenever Artifact releases, I've been selling my Dota 2 items. So I have, I'm converting all that money into Artifact, guys. So hopefully I can pay for most of my first set with just Dota 2 items. But let's move on. And next on the list we have Mazzy, who is a 6/3/6 hero. Pretty weird stats, having a pretty low health for red, but this really high armor number is kind of unique. And if you look at his hero card here, before we give him a star rating, you can modify one of your towers with +1 armor. So that's an improvement, so you can cast it into any lane from whatever lane you're in. As a package, you know, I have to give him like a 2.5, just because, like, while the 6 is, everything about him is just mediocre, right? He's just right in the middle. 6 attack, you know, it's pretty good at you know, winning like a 2-round a duel, but it's not going to kill many heroes round 1, right? The 3 armor is obviously fantastic, but 6 health is really low, so he's kind of like a mediocre effective health because, you know, piercing damage in this game is well, it's not like super common. It's still prevalent, you know. And Zeus casts his ult for 4 piercing damage, and that 3 armor isn't looking so good. That being said, you know, you toss a cheap cloak on him, and you're looking at 10 health, so maybe that can be made up for pretty quickly. But the main issue with the hero is that I feel like the incentive for putting him in your list is to deal with um, sacrificing a lane and not having that lane die too quickly or whatever. You can commit less resources to this lane now because you have that armor there, but you can't really like put the list in or put the hero into the list and count on that as part of your strategy because you might never hit his hero card in time, and you kind of need 2 before it actually begins to slow down a lane significantly. So you can't really adjust your strategy to be like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice a lane harder early because I can cast these reinforcements in there. And if you can't do that, then the only thing that he's really got going for him is in a meta that's full of wide decks, his card is going to be really good. So then it's a meta call, and, you know, I feel comfortable putting him at 2.5 because, you know, if it's a wide meta, then you can toss him in there and he'll help you at times slow down your opponent. But even like casting just 1 on a tower, all the creeps are still going to deal at least 1 damage. So it's not that big of an effect, which is why I say he's just kind of mediocre and in the middle. And next we have Pugna, who is a 6 attack, 9 health hero, so he's very similar to Mazzy in stats. In fact, I'll probably rate him at exactly the same as 2.5. Although I really have no clue exactly how he's going to end up being, especially once another set releases, because if we take a look here, he has an ability that is an active 3, condemn a random enemy improvement, and that could end up being really important in certain metas. And if you deploy him 3rd in your list and you toss him down a lane, he has to survive once, and you cast that active, destroy an important improvement. That could be good, and it could be important in certain metas. But aside from that, he's just kind of lackluster. You know, not quite as much attack as you'd hope for in red. You know, toss a short sword on him and he's starting to look better. Not quite the health that you'd look for in red when you compare him to heroes like Axe or Legion, who's going to have that armor stacking up over multiple damage instances. And his hero card, though, is what really holds him back, right? Because if we take a look here, today we've been using Artifact Fire. It's weird. I feel like right now there's not like one site that is perfect, because they don't list his premier card. So we go over here to Artifact Buff, and here we go. We got his premier card, Nether Ward. After an opponent plays a spell, deal 3 damage to the enemy tower. And this is such a strange card, because your opponent can just react to it and play around it. But obviously, if your opponent has a ton of spells, they kind of have to choose to take the damage. But I'd say that ultimately it's extremely weak because your opponent can play entirely around it. Like if there's a trap card or some way that was like hidden, your opponent didn't know it was going to happen, I could see it having more value, but the opponent's staring at the Netherworld like, okay, do I cast my spell? And they weigh the risks and they decide whether or not to do it. It makes the card have much more limited applicability than you'd hope for in a card. So yeah, he's got the, you know, mediocre card on the same level as Bristleback's card, but he does not have Bristleback stats. So we'll just slap a good old 2.5 on him because of the potential for, you know, use in a meta with full of improvements. But beyond that, he's kind of just meh. And moving on, we have the highest health character in the game that we are aware of yet, and that is Tidehunter at 2/118. He is going to survive forever, but he is not going to kill even creeps. So that's kind of a problem. But he does bring a few powerful effects to the game. So first, we can take a look at his ability, which is Ravage. So on a cooldown of 4, you're going to be stunning your enemy neighbors directly in front of you and to the left and right. And then for everybody else, you get a 50% chance to stun each one of them individually. That's pretty good. That's like really good. You know, you have initiative going into his lane, and you click that button. Your opponent's not doing anything for that round potentially, especially if their heroes lined up directly in front of him. However, you'll probably only use it once a game, so there's only so much that you can say that adds to his uh, evaluation. But if we take a look at his hero card over here, Kraken Shell, it is modify red hero with +1 armor, so it's going to be permanent, and get initiative. Now, get initiative is really hard to evaluate, but I have to say you kind of evaluate it really high because you only run get initiative when you have plans for it. So if you're running blue, you run get initiative cards to allow you to annihilate the important lanes. If you're running red, you might use, obviously you're running red, but if you're running like a really heavy red deck, you might use it to set up an enough magic play that's important, or whatever it may be. You could in fact cast this on a different red hero, you come to Tidehunter's lane and you use his ultimate right from the get-go to prevent them from doing anything in that lane because you stunned them. So there's tons of applicability for this spell. So I'd have to say the spell is really high, but as a hero package, we kind of have to decide, you know, how often is that initiative, you know, is playing around this initiative card and getting 3 1-cost initiative cards worth running Tidehunter, who's not even killing creeps. And, you know, I'd have to say, overall, let's give him like a 3.5, because, as I said, in the decks that you end up running him, he's going to have a point. He brings 3 really cheap initiative cards, a good effect to be comboed with initiative, and he's never going to die. So that's all good there, but I think that he kind of lacks what most red decks are going to want, and it's damage. So in that sense, he can't really get any higher than a 3.5. So if you're looking for somebody who's indestructible and can set up plays, then Tidehunter is your guy, but otherwise just avoid him. And next up we have Ursa, who is a very interesting hero. At 710, he has very solid stats. They are not the most amazing for red, but they are not bad either. And he has strange passive, which each time he deals battle damage to a unit, he's going to modify them with -1 armor, which is nice, but it doesn't really do a whole lot. And if you look at his premier card, it's a +4 attack, +4 armor for a red hero this round. It's pretty good, but often that 4 armor really isn't going to be a huge difference, except for into certain matchups. And that's kind of where I'm gonna, how I'm gonna evaluate Ursa, and that is into red and into black decks. He is exceptional in a meta that has enough bruiser-based decks that are going to try to, you know, fight you and hit you and gank you and duel you and whatever it may be. That card is amazing, right? Because gaining the 4 armor or the 4 attack is going to be necessary for killing a lot of red heroes. And some black heroes, and gaining that 4 armor is going to be necessary for surviving those same red and black heroes. Now, there are some elements of green that would be focused on fighting as well, but not all of them. So I'd still have to say this is primarily an anti-black, anti-red hero. In a meta that's full of all these bruisers, you make the switch to Ursa because that -1 armor each time you fight, and that extra +4 attack and +4 armor are going to be excellent in these bruising matchups. But against a blue hero, you don't really need the +4 attack to kill them. You don't really need the +4 armor to survive them. So his card is going to be almost negligible. And against green, you're really only benefiting from the attack bonus most of the time. So with that being said, I'd have to give him probably a 3.5. Similar to Tidehunter, he's got a lot of applicability, but just not everywhere. And the first main deck card we will be taking a look at is New Orders, which for 1 cost, you get to choose an ally and choose a combat target for it, which is pretty decent. However, it's kind of like this kill effect, right? You use it to point your red hero at a character and kill that character. Or sometimes your red hero is already attacking a character, but they're off by a couple damage, so you take a creep and point them at that character you're fighting as well. However, it doesn't happen immediately, right? So you cast this to point your hero at the opponent's hero, and they can just respawn by moving them, by tossing a creep in front of your hero to redirect your pointer once again. They can, you know, buff that hero's health. They can stun your hero. They can do all sorts of things. So if you're going to run a card that's sole purpose is to eliminate opponent's heroes, you're not going to run this one. So for that reason, like, it gets entirely replaced by Duel and Berserker's Call, which obviously Axes and Legionnaire's main cards. So there's no reason to run new orders, because it just doesn't do what it does as effectively as other cards. That being said, in draft or limited or whatever, it has its uses. I found it to be nice. You know, you're just like, oh, as I said, you point that creep at the hero, get that extra 2 damage, and you kill them, and that can be a big deal. So I'll give it a, I don't know, I'd say a 1.5 in constructed and a 2.5 in limited, because it's just, you don't have those replacement cards for it in limited. And Poised to Strike is up next, which gives a red hero +4 attack this round. And, you know, Swim gave it a 3, and I can kind of see that. I was initially tempted to be like 1, you know, like this card does like nothing. I think that would be completely wrong, because 4 attack is significant. You know, that can very easily surprise your opponent. But I'd never even tried this card yet, to be honest, because I always looked at it and was like, opportunity cost. I can't afford to run this. There are other cards that do more. And for that reason, I'm still going to rate it low. But there is the scenario where it can be good, which is the scenario where you and your opponent are going back and forth trying to bait out your opponent's cards. And in this, you know, slow rolling scenario, especially when you're early on in the game and you don't have a ton of mana, you know, I equip an item, my opponent equips an item, I play a 3-cost creep or something, my opponent then feels safe because I only have 1 mana to commit, you know, their own card, and then I play Poised to Strike, and it's kind of this hidden aggro that your opponent wasn't anticipating, because they see you use all your mana, and now you're killing their hero. And that's where I see more value from this. Also with killing towers, you know, maybe you equip a short sword to one of your heroes, your opponent blocks that hero, and then you Poised to Strike another red hero. And in that sense, I can see this card being a little bit better because it's so cheap and still offers a significant enough bonus that it has some hidden factor potential where it can catch your opponent off guard. So I'll go ahead and give it a 2.5, because as I said, I find it so hard. Like, how could you ever run this when there are so many other good cards? But yeah, I'm not going to give it the 1 I was initially tempted to give it. Next on the list is the one and only Bronze Legionnaire, the generic dude in the army, who is actually insane. So he deserves a very high rating. The argument as to whether it's 4.5 or 5, I don't know. I think you could even argue for 4. I think it has to be a 4 or 4.5. I'll give it a 4.5, just because there isn't that insane upside to this card, but it is incredibly consistent and a ton of value. So round 1 you can drop this and it will just kill creeps for days. So that 4 attack, 2 armor, and 2 health means it is taking no damage from creeps ever, and it is killing creeps in 1 hit. So it is insanely consistent. In almost any red deck you're going to put 3 of them in. However, it just doesn't have that upside as some other cards might. So in some decks where you're not going for a lot of early board state or early aggression, you could see yourself not running 3 of these, maybe dropping it down to 2 or 1 or even none, if the opportunity cost of running this early game insane value isn't worth losing a late game insane value card. So in that sense, you can't really give him a 5, but a solid 4.5 is definitely deserved. And next on the list, we have Combat Training, which is the first real disagreement I had with Swim. So Swim is giving it a rating of 2.5, but I'm going to have to give it a rating of probably 4, which is really high, and it probably doesn't deserve that, but it just feels that way when I play it. And the reason why is that red really needs to hit certain damage thresholds to be able to win any game, because it relies so heavily on cards like Duel and Berserker's Call. And if those cards don't kill heroes, you can't win the game, because you don't have a way to remove the blue heroes that might be casting that annihilation or whatever it may be. And that 2 damage can sometimes be the difference. So Combat Training is this card that farthers that goal of keeping all of your red heroes at the point where Duel and Berserker's Call are enough damage, but it's also really good on round 1, because your opponent will often put in higher health heroes into their first lineup to avoid round 1 deaths. And combat training is, you toss it on your Bristleback, and now he's hitting for 10 and he kills that Lycan or whatever it may be that previously he wasn't. And it feels really good to do that. And when you're tossing out 3 red heroes in your first deployment, there's a good shot that combat training is going to be the difference there. Now, that being said, round 1 kills aren't the end-all be-all. Just because you killed someone round 1 doesn't mean you won. In fact, it might be the wrong thing to do, but in red decks, especially aggressive ones, getting those early kills is really important because you need that gold influx to buy those compounding effect items like Stonewall Cloak and the sword and the armor that build up over time. And combat training is just one of those cards that contributes to that game plan, while also ensuring that in late game you are going to reach that damage threshold that you need. So I give it a 4, but I think I will add the caveat that as the game progresses, we could easily see things replace it if there are other things that do offer that damage boost over time effect. Just in a better way. Because ultimately the card doesn't do a whole lot. It's just the weird interaction with red and how important it is to have the damage to kill heroes. But enough about that. Let's go ahead and move on. And we are moving from a card that might be bad, but that I like, to a card that is just definitely bad. Okay, so curseseid at 6/6 for 5 might at first glance seem decent, but the effect of summoning a zombie for your opponent after the combat phase is a huge drawback. Like, it can be comboed in a sense with conflagration or other effects that deal damage at the beginning of a round to not have as big of a drawback. But at the same time, that 2/2 zombie that's being chucked in front of someone could spawn in front of a hero, right? And if you don't have a way to remove it, that Satyr might have blocked 8 damage to the tower. Yeah, it's just a strange card that really doesn't deserve much. So I gotta give it like I'll agree with Swim. A 2-star rating seems fine. But yeah, let's just go ahead and move on. And we have an even worse card in Grand Melee. So I don't know that I'd quite give it a 1, which is what Swim give it. I'll give it that 1.5 rating. Just because I can see a world in which you just really badly need cleave early, or somehow. But the problem of it also affecting your opponent's heroes is a big deal. But I think that in a meta full of like super wide decks, you'd find that Grand Melee would be asymmetrical in the sense that your heroes are going to be spawning at random intervals against all of this line of creeps, and their one hero, the chance that his having cleave is going to actually damage something is much lower when you only have 3 units to their 8, and in that sense it becomes asymmetrical, and at that point Grand Melee is useful. It's just a static buff to all your heroes. So in that sense, I give it that extra 0.5 star because there is an asymmetrical effect if you get to the point in the meta where there's just a ton of wide decks. But beyond that, this card really doesn't deserve to see play anywhere because you're probably doing as much hurt to yourself as you're doing to your opponent. Next up, we have Mercenary Exiles, which is another instance where I kind of disagree with Swim. Although not quite as much, because Swim did point out that he likes the card. He gave it a solid 3.5. However, I really like cards that have multiple purposes and are good at multiple points in the game, and that's what I kind of like about Mercenary Exiles. So at 2/14, it's a decent drop early because when you drop it down, it's going to beat a creep. So it'll take 1 damage the first attack, and it'll take 1 damage the next attack, and it will have killed the creep at that point. So it beats creeps in combat, so in that sense, it's a decent enough turn 1 drop. But if you draw it late game, it still has applicability in that it's cheap, but it's a lot of hidden damage if you're sitting on these high gold counts. So I like running Mercenary Exiles in an aggressive red deck, or red-black, something like that, where you're generating a ton of gold, but maybe you're running efficient gold items. You're not running the most expensive ones, you're running these efficient ones so that as you generate gold early with these kills, you're instantly buying up items that are going to give you incremental advantages. You're not saving for something big like Vestra. And in that type of deck, you're going to build up a gold just this cache of gold at the end of the game that you're not spending, and that's where I like Mercenary Exiles. So you run an aggressive early list, you buy items up quickly. Towards the end of the game, you can't spend all of your money because you put cheaper cards into your item deck, and now you drop a Mercenary Exiles, consume that 20 gold, and for 3 mana, you just dropped a 12 attack creep, which is crazy, because in the late game, especially, you're kind of trying to force your opponent to make use of their blockers, make use of their AoE spells, whatever it may be, before you really commit what you're holding on to and what your plan is for winning the game. So if you have, 8 to 10 mana, you might, cast like a, I don't know, Red Mist Pillager, you might cast something else, your opponent responds to it, then you drop the Mercenary Exiles, eat all your gold, and you win the game because you just hit their tower for 12. It's kind of like a strange scenario that's not going to come up all the time, but I have really appreciated having this dualistic card in my aggressive red decks that not only is it good early and trades with creeps, but it's also good late game. Now, it's not exceptional in either of those cases, but I like that just how well it fills both those slots to the point where I'm willing to give it at least a 4. But that being said, it's only worth a 4 if you do choose to go for that sort of I know I'm going to generate gold, but I want to keep cheap items so that I can immediately invest that gold rather than saving up for something big. In that sort of list, then this is definitely deserving of a 4. And again, we have another disagreement. So at 0-6, with giving your adjacent neighbors +4 attack, Legion standardbearer is, in my opinion, really bad. Well, not necessarily in my opinion, just in my experience. It's so hard for to get the correct placement of this card. So you're very rarely ever going to buff more than one unit, at least in my experience, because you can't push apart units like you can in Hearthstone. Most of the time, you're only going to have 1 or 2 legal choices to place this guy. So with how little choice you have over where he goes, it's just hard to see him as, deserving of a very decent rating. And for that reason, I guess maybe Swim's right at 3, but I don't know. I've never found him to be that useful in my experience, which albeit might be limited because I don't put him in my main decks, and I haven't drafted him much in draft. So I don't know. I guess I could give him a 3, but I'd be tempted to go for more of a 2 just because of how inconsistent the placement of his card is. But, if you look at him as just a 6 health blocker that sometimes gives some more damage, I guess you could, maybe push him up to that 3 range. Next up, we have Clear the Deck, which is an interesting card. When you first see this, give all allied heroes +4 cleave this round, you kind of think of it as an anti-wave card, an anti-wide deck card. And it is that in a sense, but it's also really applicable even when your opponent hasn't gone wide, in that if your hero isn't lined up against their hero, and it's like hero creep, it's actually really good at killing their hero, because adding that 4 damage along with the 2 damage of the creep, 6 damage will oftentimes kill a hero, especially in round 2, which is when you coincidentally can first play this card. So it's actually not solely filling this role of trying to wave clear, which is why I feel comfortable agreeing with Swim's rating, which is I believe 3.5. Because it does have more than one use, and it is pretty solid. But that being said, cleave is... The benefit of this is hard to weigh, because the board states will be so varied when you're looking into wide decks. How, if you have 2 heroes lined up next to each other, then their cleaves aren't as effective as if they're spread out and cleaving all the, these creeps individually. It might not kill the higher health creeps anyways, it might not kill higher health heroes anyways, but sometimes it does. So it's just hard to evaluate, but I think that because it has more than one use, I feel comfortable giving it that 3.5. And next we have Enough Magic, which is one of the cooler cards in Red, to be honest. Red has a lot of kind of boring cards. It's a lot of just attack buff, armor buff, health buff, whatever it may be. And then Enough Magic comes in and has this really unique effect of just ending the action phase. I suppose it technically reads proceed to the combat phase, but it's the same thing. In any case, It's also another card that's kind of hard to evaluate because on one end it's insane because if the board state's in the right position, it's just gonna be nuts. But on the other end, it's really really inconsistent because part of the problem is unless you have a card like Conflagration that deals damage at the beginning of an action phase, enough magic could be completely destroyed by just random creep spawns, right? So maybe you set up a lane and it's getting really close to death, and you move on to the next round, and you're like, okay, I have initiative. I'm just getting enough magic, and then your enemy's one creep just spawns right in front of your red hero. Playing enough magic, your red hero just now hits that creep, and the tower doesn't die. So in absence of clear effects, it's kind of inconsistent. But that being said, it is still really good and has potential to be game winning. Your opponent's trying to annihilate a lane, and you're just like enough magic, and now the tower's dead. Your opponent, it's also kind of a similar effect to annihilate into some decks. Any deck that is trying to go slow and do some silly things might need to play 4 to 5 cards in a later round. And especially when you consider cards in blue that we'll get to hopefully at some point in the future that can reset your tower's mana. There'll be rounds where opponents are trying to do a ton of things, and enough magic can just be like, nope, you're not doing that this turn. And that could end up winning you the game. It could buy you just long enough to do that. So it's good both aggressively, and in some cases it is also a useful defensive card. So yeah, I'd say it's a solid 3.5 just because it has really high upside, but it's really inconsistent. And this next card here is one of my favorite cards in red. That being Red Mist Pillager, which I gotta read all this. So after the combat phase, if Red Mist Pillager dealt battle damage to a tower this round, summon a Red Mist Pillager. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if your opponent doesn't deal with it, it's going to exponentially multiply into first 2, then 4, then 8, then 16 Red Mist Pillagers, just pounding your opponent's tower, and then the Ancient. And that is really good. It's a card that makes your opponent respond. However, it's 2 health, which means it instantly dies to cards like Conflagration. Any sort of AoE is going to have enough to kill it. So it's really easy to answer, and at 5 mana cost, being so easily answerable is a significant drawback. So I think it's a really well designed card, really high upside. It makes your opponent have to respond to a lane. They can't just abandon it, because if they do, Red Mist Pillagers often are enough to kill the tower, especially if you combo. You're playing red-black, and you toss in a card like Nevermore into that lane as well, and now all these Red Mist Pillagers that are multiplying are dealing 6 damage and not just 4. Or any other stat buff in general is going to be nuts with the Red Mist Pillagers. While Swim gave it a 3.5 because it's so easily answerable, I'm going to give it a 4 just because, I don't know, something I really value in this game is forcing my opponent to respond to the Ancient. And because that makes taking the second tower so much easier. When you first beat a lane, you can abandon it with your heroes, but the Red Mist Pillagers are enough to force your opponent to respond to it. That is just nuts. There's so much value there. So your opponent has to toss in a blue hero into the lane that doesn't matter anymore, just so that they don't auto lose to pillagers. And now they're running 1 less blue hero in their other lanes, which is crazy. That's so much benefit. So while I see the drawbacks and can't rate it really any higher than a 4, I definitely give it at least a 4, above Swim's rating of 3.5. And we are getting close to the end here. This has been really long, but we're nearing there, guys. So we have Augur Conscript here, who is 727. Very comparable to Axe's stats, even, just slightly less health, and obviously he's not a hero. So, very good stat line, very solid creep, but I don't think it's worth running in Constructed ever, really. Part of the issue is that a creep like that is so easily answered by a card like Slay or even Annihilation. There are plenty of effects that just kind of ignore high health counts, but even if your opponent doesn't answer the Augur Conscript, it's only 7 damage to the tower. It doesn't have quite the upside as some other creeps for hitting the tower. And even if they can, toss a little blocker in front of it, and it doesn't have any siege. So while it's really efficient, it's too fair, in my opinion. So I'll agree with Swim's rating of 3.5. At the 6 mana cost range, there are just cards that are more broken than it. Not much else to say. But in limited, it is really, really solid. And next we have Spring the Trap, which is an interesting card because for 7 cost, you can actually affect any lane, which is very uncommon in red. And what you're going to do is summon 2 Centaur Hunters into that lane. And Centaur Hunters, if you don't know, are 4/8, I believe. Let's find this here. They are indeed 4/8. Apparently 5 mana cost. Can't say I've run this card too much, but it seems like it'd be pretty good. I think the biggest issue with Spring the Trap as a card is basically that you're competing with the next card on the list for the end game high mana cost option. That being said, the fact that it can affect any lane might be worth making you included in some list, just because you win a lane early, and then that one lane might have a stranded hero in it, but they can at least toss this card into a lane that matters. Also, side note, it can be used to chunk block a lane that is about to die. Tossing 2 bodies in that lane just to make it survive one more turn could, in theory, save the game. I think giving it a rating of 4 by Swim is a little bit generous, just because you're not controlling the placement of these cards. But at the same time, I can see it. So we'll just go ahead and include concur with Swim here and give it a 4. And last, but certainly not least, we have Time of Triumph, which is absolutely bonkers. This card is so good. Modify allied heroes with +4 attack, armor, health, cleave, retaliate, and siege. That's crazy. There's so much consistent value in this card. Swim just immediately gave this a 5. And despite everything I've just said here, I'm hesitant about giving it a solid 5. I might give it a 4.5 just because it does have that giant cost of 8. And while this is an incredible finisher, as more sets release, as more cards come out, as the metagame develops and potentially becomes faster, it might become slower, in which case Time of Triumph definitely stays at a 5. I could see this eventually being pushed out by cards that are equally as efficient or as crazy good, but are just cheaper, right? And not being able to play this till round 8 means you could effectively lose the game before round 8 comes around. So that kind of makes me hesitant to give it that full 5 rating, but definitely at least a 4.5. And trust me, this does amazing things. You don't have to hit all of your heroes for this to be good. Just hitting a couple can mean you finish off a lane because 8 siege might be enough. Hitting 3 heroes is going to be crazy. At that point, most of your heroes become just unkillable because the combination of 4 armor and 4 more health is just so much more survivability. Your heroes are unkillable from then on. Your heroes are constantly dealing damage to towers from then on. They're wave clearing from then on. Yeah, it's a lot of value. So Time of Triumph is this card that, as long as the meta stays slow enough, you're going to see it in every single red deck. But if the meta ever focuses on something a little bit faster, then I think that Time of Triumphs would be cut potentially entirely, but most likely just down to like a 1-of, just as kind of a end game backup plan. So what in the end are sort of my final thoughts on red as a color, as a faction? What can they do? It's an interesting question. I think that red, while at face value, it seems nuts. Everyone at first is going to come to the game and be like, all these red characters have such high health. They're going to be amazing. Everybody's going to want to play these guys at first. And while it's kind of true, I think that red is very clunky. It can be paired with a lot of other colors, and other colors can sort of solve red's weaknesses. But red as a whole has very little utility. All it can really do is buff stats and hit stuff. It can do a little bit of hero killing with Axe and Legionnaires cards, but beyond that, it doesn't have a lot of ways to just take the initiative, right? All it's really good at doing is being like, look at my guys, they have a ton of stats, you have to deal with them, right? But it doesn't have that same it factor as blue does, of being able to just be like, annihilation, right? Wave clear, or even like black being like payday, payday. I have, you know, infinite gold and can now just win the game with whatever I buy. It doesn't have, I don't know, I don't, it's hard to explain what it lacks. But that being said, paired with a color in such a way as to alleviate those weaknesses, red becomes really strong. Uh, so I don't know, it's kind of hard to evaluate at that point. I will say one of my favorite archetypes is the red-black hero killer. I like just constantly eliminating my opponent's heroes. You know, you don't have to worry about as much when your opponent's heroes are dead and can't play any cards. I also do like the red-blue control late game. You keep wave clearing them until you can Time of Triumph and just end the game off that, essentially. Um, so as a whole, I'd rate the faction as definitely competitive viable, but it's kind of like this foundation that you build your deck upon, but you need the other color to bring a lot of utility for the list to work, at least in my experience. In any case, guys, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe. It really does help us out. If you didn't like us, please tell us why. Obviously, we're just starting to produce artifact content, and we want to know what you as the viewer wants, and we will try to produce that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.